The gavel fell, its crack echoing through the courtroom like a breaking bone. 18-year-old Ethan Carter stood alone, a boy in a borrowed suit facing the leviathan of the state. He was his own lawyer. Across the room, Prosecutor Parker smirked, a predator scenting an easy kill. From her perch on high, Judge Margaret Lawson's eyes glinted with a cold, clinical amusement, ready to watch the slaughter. They all saw a fool about to be devoured by the system. Ethan saw his only chance to prove them wrong before he was silenced forever. Her face, a mask of practiced neutrality framed by severe iron-gray hair, was fixed on the young man standing alone at the defense table. He was a boy, really, 18 years old, with a shock of unruly brown hair that fell across his forehead and a borrowed suit that hung on his slender frame like a hand-me-down. This was Ethan Carter, and he was, to the court's undisguised astonishment, representing himself. Judge Lawson peered down at him over the top of her spectacles, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. It was not a smile of warmth, but of wry, clinical amusement, the kind a biologist might grant a particularly naive specimen under a microscope. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice echoing with a crisp, judicial authority that filled every corner of the room. "The court has, against its better judgment, granted your request to proceed pro se. I feel compelled to remind you, however, that this is not a high school debate club. This is a court of law, the complexities of which can overwhelm even seasoned professionals. Are you quite certain you wish to continue down this ambitious path?" The word ambitious was laced with a delicate, razor-sharp brand of mockery. In the gallery, a ripple of muffled chuckles spread through the spectators. Journalism students, retirees seeking daytime drama, and the morbidly curious. At the prosecution's table, Mr. Parker, a portly man with a florid face and a suit that seemed a size too small, allowed himself a broad, confident smirk. He shuffled his papers with the easy swagger of a man who believed the game was already won. He was a hunter, and before him was a fawn that had wandered willingly into a snare. Ethan Carter stood perfectly still, his hands resting on the smooth, cool wood of the table in front of him. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the cavernous silence. He could feel the weight of their collective disbelief, their pity, their condescending amusement. It was a physical pressure, threatening to crush him before he'd even spoken a word. He had spent the last 2 months in the county law library, devouring books on criminal procedure, evidence, and trial advocacy, until the words blurred into an incoherent soup in his exhausted mind. He was terrified, but beneath the terror was a hard, cold knot of resolve. They saw a foolish boy. He had to make them see something else. He took a slow, deliberate breath, letting it fill his lungs and steady his nerves. He lifted his gaze and met Judge Lawson's directly. His voice, when it came, was not the trembling whisper they expected. It was clear, measured, and surprisingly resonant. "Your Honor," Ethan said, his tone unwavering. "I am aware of the gravity of the charges against me and the complexities of this court. But I believe the truth is not a complex thing. And I believe that I am the only one in this room who is fully committed to revealing it." He paused, letting his words settle. "So, yes, I am quite certain." The chuckles in the gallery died. Mr. Parker's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. Judge Lawson's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. She held his gaze for a long moment, a silent battle of wills playing out across the courtroom. She had expected a mumbled, intimidated response. What she received was a declaration. "Very well, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice now stripped of its earlier condescension and cooled to a steely professionalism. "Confidence is a commendable trait. Let us see if it is a well-founded one. Mr. Parker, you may begin." Ethan's heart was still pounding, but a new sensation was mixed with the fear. a spark of defiance. He had survived the first exchange. He had stood his ground. As Mr. Parker rose to his feet, radiating an aura of predatory certainty, Ethan squared his shoulders. The room was against him. The system was against him. But as he glanced at the 12 faces in the jury box, 12 ordinary people, a mix of ages and backgrounds, their expressions currently unreadable, he clung to a fragile sliver of hope. They were the only ones who mattered. And his trial, his life, had just begun. 1. Parker's opening statement. Mr. Parker straightened his tie, smoothed the front of his jacket, and strode into the open space before the jury box. He moved with a practiced, deliberate grace, a showman taking his stage. He clasped his hands behind his back and began to pace slowly, his polished shoes making soft, rhythmic clicks on the floor. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice a rich, persuasive baritone. He made eye contact with each juror, one by one, forging a connection, drawing them into his narrative. "Good morning. My name is Alan Parker, and it is my duty to represent the people of this state. Our duty in this room is a simple one. It is the pursuit of truth. And over the next few days, I will present to you a truth that is clear, straightforward, and undeniable." He stopped pacing and turned to gesture towards the defendant's table, his arm extended, his finger pointing, a gesture of casual condemnation. "The truth," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more confessional, more intimate, "is that on the evening of April the 17th, the young man sitting right there, Ethan Carter, committed a crime. Not a complicated crime, not a crime of passion or elaborate planning, a common crime, a street crime. He decided that something that did not belong to him, a 2022 sedan, the property of Mrs. Eleanor Harris, should be his. And so, he took it." Parker let the accusation hang in the air. He watched the jurors, saw them glance at Ethan, their faces hardening with the seed of suspicion he had just planted. Ethan felt their eyes on him, a series of tiny, sharp judgments. He forced himself to remain impassive, to keep his expression neutral, though inside he felt a roiling mix of anger and fear. He was just a story to them, a character in Parker's play. "The evidence will be simple," Parker went on, resuming his pacing. "It will not be confusing. It will not be ambiguous. It will paint a picture as clear as a photograph. You will hear from Officer Michael Reed, a decorated 10-year veteran of the police force. He will tell you, in his own words, how he was on patrol that night and personally witnessed Mr. Carter in the act of breaking into and hot-wiring Mrs. Harris's vehicle. He saw it with his own 2 eyes. He paused for dramatic effect. You will hear how Mr. Carter, upon realizing he'd been caught red-handed, didn't surrender. He didn't give up. No, he chose to flee. He led Officer Reed on a dangerous foot chase through dark alleyways, showing a clear consciousness of his own guilt. And when he was finally apprehended, where was he? He was inside Mrs. Harris's stolen car, moments away from making his getaway. He was caught, in the act, in the car. Parker moved closer to the jury box, lowering his voice again. "We will also show you video evidence, security footage from a camera positioned across the street from the alley where the theft occurred. While the quality is what you might expect from a security camera, you will see a figure matching Mr. Carter's description, at the exact time of the incident, entering the vehicle." He straightened up, his voice rising to a crescendo of certainty. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a puzzle. There are no missing pieces. We have an eyewitness, a police officer. We have the defendant caught at the scene of the crime. We have video evidence. We have a clear motive, theft, and we have a clear indication of guilt, flight from law enforcement. At the end of this trial, after you have heard all the evidence, I will ask you to do your duty. I will ask you to look at the facts, to look at this young man, and to find the truth. That Ethan Carter is guilty. Guilty of grand theft auto and guilty of resisting arrest. Thank you." He gave a final, confident nod to the jury and walked back to his table, the picture of self-assurance. The narrative was set. The jurors looked at Ethan with new eyes, eyes filled with the certainty of the story they had just been told. Ethan's stomach tightened. Parker had built a cage of facts, and now he had to find a way to dismantle it, bar by rusty bar. The prosecution calls Officer Michael Reed to the stand. Officer Reed was the platonic ideal of a police officer. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw and a neatly trimmed mustache, he walked to the witness stand with an air of unshakable confidence. His dark blue uniform was impeccably pressed, the brass buttons gleaming under the courtroom lights. He took the oath with a firm, clear voice and settled into the chair, looking directly at Parker as if they were the only two people in the room. Parker began his questioning with a series of simple, foundational queries, establishing Reed's credentials, his years of service, his commendations. It was all designed to build a foundation of credibility, to present him to the jury as an unimpeachable source of truth. "Officer Reed," Parker said, his tone respectful, "could you please tell the jury where you were on the evening of April 17th? "I was on patrol in my marked vehicle in the vicinity of the downtown warehouse district," Reed answered, his voice a low, steady rumble. "And did anything unusual catch your attention around 11:30 p.m.? "Yes, it did. I was driving down a service lane behind a row of businesses when I observed a figure in a dark alleyway between two buildings. The individual was hunched over the driver's side door of a parked sedan." "What did you do?" "I parked my vehicle at the mouth of the alley, turned off my headlights to maintain a low profile, and proceeded on foot to get a better look. I used a brick column for cover as I observed." "And what did you see, officer?" Parker's voice was a prompter, guiding Reed through the pre-rehearsed script. "I saw the defendant," Reed said, gesturing with a nod toward Ethan. "He was using some sort of tool to jimmy the lock on the car door. After a moment I heard a click, and he opened the door and slipped inside." A low murmur went through the gallery. Ethan's hands, hidden beneath the table, clenched into fists. "Lies. It's all lies." "What happened next?" "The interior light of the vehicle came on. I had a clear view of him. He leaned under the steering column. Based on my training and experience, his actions were consistent with an attempt to hotwire the vehicle. I saw sparks." "Sparks?" Parker repeated, letting the word hang in the air for the jury. "Yes, sir. A couple of small, bright flashes from under the dashboard. At that point, I determined a felony was in progress. I broke cover and identified myself." "How did you identify yourself?" I shouted. "Police! Stop what you're doing! Show me your hands!" "And did the defendant comply?" "No, sir, he did not. The moment he saw me, he scrambled out of the passenger side door and took off running down the alley." "So he fled?" "That's correct. I pursued on foot, ordering him to stop several times. He ignored my commands." "Were you eventually able to apprehend him?" "Yes. After a chase of about 2 blocks, he circled back, apparently disoriented, and tried to get back into the stolen vehicle. I was able to cut him off and place him under arrest inside the car." "So, to be clear, Officer Reed," Parker summarized, walking towards the jury box, "you personally witnessed the defendant break into the car. You saw him attempting to hotwire it. He fled when you identified yourself as police, and you arrested him inside the very vehicle he was attempting to steal." "Yes, sir," Reed said, his face a mask of certainty. "That is correct." "Thank you, officer. No further questions, Your Honor." Parker sat down, a look of triumph on his face. The cage was locked. Judge Lawson turned her gaze to Ethan. "Mr. Carter, you may cross-examine the witness." Ethan's throat felt as dry as dust. His notes, meticulously prepared, suddenly seemed like a foreign language. He could feel every eye in the courtroom on him. He pushed his chair back, the sound scraping loudly in the tense silence, and walked on unsteady legs to the lectern. He took a deep breath. "Officer Reed," he began, his voice a little shaky at first. "You testified that you were on patrol that night. What was the purpose of your patrol in that specific area?" Reed shifted slightly, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "General patrol, son. We were monitoring the area for suspicious activity. Suspicious activity? Had there been a string of car thefts in that specific warehouse district recently? There had been reports of break-ins in the general vicinity, yes. In the general vicinity, but not in that specific alley, correct? Parker stood up. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance? I'll allow it. The witness may answer, Judge Lawson said, a curious glint in her eye. Reed sighed. No, not in that specific alley. Thank you, Ethan said. Now you said you parked your vehicle at the mouth of the alley and turned off your headlights. How far would you estimate you were from the sedan Mrs. Harris's car when you were observing from behind the brick column? I'd say approximately 50 feet. 50 feet. And what was the lighting like in this alley, officer? Were there street lights? There was one street light at the far end of the alley, but it was flickering. The primary illumination was ambient light from the main street. Ambient light from a street 50 feet away filtered through a dark alley, and you were observing a man inside a car in the dark. Is that correct? Ethan's voice was growing stronger, more confident with each question. I had a clear enough view, Reed said, his jaw tightening. You testified that you saw sparks. Could you describe them? They were small electrical sparks, blue and white. Like the kind you'd see from touching two wires together? Exactly. Ethan paused, picking up a photograph from his table. An evidence photo of the car's interior. He approached the witness stand. Permission to approach, Your Honor? Granted. Ethan placed the photo in front of Officer Reed. Officer, this is Exhibit B, a photograph of the dashboard of Mrs. Harris's car, taken by the forensics team. Do you recognize it? I do. Could you please point out to the jury where the ignition wires have been stripped or cut? Reed stared at the photograph. He scanned it, then scanned it again. The photo clearly showed the plastic casing beneath the steering column was perfectly intact. There were no loose wires, no signs of tampering whatsoever. They aren't visible in this photograph, Reed stammered, his confidence finally cracking. They aren't visible because they were never touched, were they, officer? Ethan pressed, his voice rising. Isn't it true that there was no physical evidence of an attempt to hotwire that car at all? The defendant could have been startled before he finished the job. Or, Ethan countered, turning to face the jury, the sparks you saw from 50 feet away in a poorly lit alley were something else entirely. Maybe the glint of a key? The reflection from a phone screen? Is it possible you were mistaken, officer? I know what I saw, Reed said, his voice low and defensive. The jurors were no longer looking at Ethan with suspicion. They were looking at Officer Reed. They were leaning forward, whispering to one another. Doubt, like a hairline crack in a dam, had begun to form. Let's talk about the chase, Ethan continued, moving back to the lectern. You testified that you identified yourself by shouting, "Police," is that correct? Yes. Were you in your full uniform, officer? I was. Including your badge and hat? I wasn't wearing my hat, and I was wearing a standard-issue tactical jacket over my uniform shirt. So your badge, which is pinned to your shirt, would have been covered by this jacket? Reed hesitated. It may have been partially obscured, yes. So, to a scared kid in a dark alley, you were just a large man in a dark jacket, shouting and running at him from the shadows. Is that a fair assessment? Objection! Parker yelled, jumping to his feet. Calls for speculation. Sustained, Judge Lawson said. Mr. Carter, rephrase. Let me ask it this way, officer, Ethan said, his eyes locked on Reed. From 50 feet away, in the dark, with your badge covered, what specifically identified you as a police officer and not just some random person? Officer Reed stared back, his mouth a thin, hard line. He had no answer. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Nothing further, Your Honor. Ethan walked back to his table, his legs feeling much steadier than before. He sat down, his heart still racing, but this time with adrenaline, not just fear. He had landed a blow. He had shown the jury that the prosecution's star witness, the bedrock of their entire case, might just be standing on sand. The next witness called was Mrs. Eleanor Harris. She was a woman in her late 60s, with soft white hair and a kind, worried face. She walked to the stand slowly, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. She looked frail and vulnerable, and Parker intended to use every ounce of that vulnerability to his advantage. She was the victim, the sympathetic face the jury could rally behind. Parker approached her with a gentle, almost paternal demeanor. His voice was soft, comforting. "Mrs. Harris, thank you for being here today. I know this is difficult for you," he began. "Could you please tell the court what kind of car you own?" "It's a 2022 blue sedan," she answered, her voice trembling slightly. "My husband George and we bought it last year. It's our only car." "And can you tell us what happened on the night of April 17th? "Well," she began, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "George and I had gone to bed around 10 o'clock. The car was parked in our driveway, just like always. The next morning I got a call from a police detective. He told me my car had been found downtown, and that a young man had been arrested trying to steal it." She glanced at Ethan, her expression a mixture of fear and confusion. "He said that this boy—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "It's all right, Mrs. Harris," Parker said soothingly. "Take your time. Did you give the defendant permission to be in your car that night?" "Oh, heavens no!" she exclaimed, genuinely horrified. "I've never seen him before in my life." "Did you leave the keys in the car, or leave it unlocked?" "Never. I'm always very careful. I know I locked it. I always double-check." Parker nodded, letting her testimony sink in with the jury. A sweet, elderly woman, careful with her property, victimized by a young thief. It was a simple, powerful narrative. "And when you saw your car at the impound lot, was there any damage?" "The policeman showed me the driver's side door. There were scratch marks around the lock," he said, from where the boy broke in." "Thank you, Mrs. Harris," Parker said, his voice filled with sympathy. "You've been very brave. No further questions." Ethan rose and approached the witness stand. He felt a pang of guilt for what he was about to do. This woman was not his enemy, but she was a piece of Parker's puzzle, and he had to show the jury that she didn't fit where the prosecutor wanted her to. "Good morning, Mrs. Harris," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm very sorry for what you've been through. I just have a few questions." She looked at him, her eyes wide with apprehension. "Mrs. Harris, you testified that you always lock your car. Is it a remote key fob, the kind with a button you press?" "Yes, that's right. And sometimes, have you ever accidentally pressed the button while the key is in your purse or pocket?" "Well, I suppose that's possible. It's happened once or twice." "So it's possible, however unlikely, that the car may have been unlocked that night?" Parker stood. "Objection. Speculation." "Sustained," said the judge. "Mr. Carter, move on." "Okay," Ethan said. "Mrs. Harris, you mentioned the police pointed out scratch marks on the door. But besides those marks around the lock, was there any other damage? A broken window? A dented frame? Anything to suggest a forced entry?" She thought for a moment. "No, I don't believe so. Just the scratches. So whoever got into the car did so without breaking a single window or prying open the door." Yes, that seems to be the case. "Thank you, Mrs. Harris," Ethan said. He was about to sit down, but a thought struck him. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble based on a single line in the police reports he had read 100 times. "Just one more thing. Do you and your husband share the car?" "Yes, of course." "And do you both have a set of keys?" "We do." "Does anyone else have a key to your car, Mrs. Harris? A family member, perhaps? A spare key you keep anywhere?" Mrs. Harris looked flustered. "Well, no, just the 2 sets. George has his and I have mine." Parker was smiling. The question had led nowhere, but Ethan wasn't done. "Your Honor," Ethan said, turning to the judge, "the defense would like to call a surprise witness, Mr. George Harris." The courtroom buzzed. Parker shot to his feet, his face turning a shade of purple. "Objection! Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense provided no notice of this witness." Judge Lawson looked down at Ethan, her expression severe. "Mr. Carter, you are aware of the rules of discovery. Why was this witness not on your list?" "Because, Your Honor," Ethan said, his voice steady, "until Mrs. Harris's testimony just now, I had no reason to believe his testimony would be relevant, New information has come to light. I believe Mr. Harris has information that is critical to this case and to the pursuit of the truth." Judge Lawson considered this for a long moment, her eyes darting between Ethan's earnest face and Parker's sputtering outrage. The jury was captivated, on the edge of their seats. "Very well," she declared, banging her gavel once. "The court will allow it. Mr. Parker, you'll have ample opportunity to question the witness. Bailiff, please find Mr. George Harris in the gallery and bring him forward." Mr. Harris was a stark contrast to his wife. He was a tall, stooped man with a hangdog expression and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of a long-held secret. He avoided looking at his wife as he took the stand and was sworn in. Ethan approached him. "Mr. Harris, thank you for agreeing to speak with us. I want to ask you the same question I asked your wife. To your knowledge, besides yourself and Mrs. Harris, does anyone else have a key to your car?" Mr. Harris swallowed hard. He glanced nervously at his wife, then at the floor. "Yes," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The air in the courtroom crackled with tension. Mrs. Harris let out a small gasp. "Could you please speak up for the court, Mr. Harris?" Judge Lawson instructed. He cleared his throat. "Yes," he repeated, louder this time. "And who is that person, Mr. Harris?" Ethan pressed gently. He hesitated, a deep, weary sigh escaping his lips. "My nephew. Ryan. Ryan Harris." "Yes. And did you by any chance loan your car to your nephew, Ryan Harris, on the day of April 17th? Mr. Harris finally looked up, his eyes meeting Ethan's. They were filled with a profound sadness and regret. "Yes," he said, the word heavy with consequence. "I did. Ryan called me that afternoon. He'd had a fight with his mother and needed to get out of the house. I told him he could borrow the car for a few hours to cool off. I didn't tell Eleanor. She worries about him. I didn't want to cause a fuss." A wave of shock rolled through the courtroom. Jurors turned to look at each other, their mouths agape. Reporters in the gallery began scribbling furiously in their notepads. Mr. Parker sat frozen at his table, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. His perfect, simple case had just been blown to pieces. The sympathetic victim was no longer a victim of a random break-in, and the timeline he had so carefully constructed had been irrevocably broken. "And when you lent him the car, did you also give him the key?" Ethan asked, his voice calm, letting the chaos swirl around him. "Yes," Mr. Harris said, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I gave him my key." "Thank you, Mr. Harris. No further questions." Ethan walked back to his table, the clicks of his shoes the only sound in the stunned silence. He didn't look at Parker. He didn't need to. He looked at the jury. The crack of doubt had just become a chasm. The prosecution, reeling from the bombshell revelation of a second driver, desperately needed to regain momentum. Parker's next witness was his attempt at a counterattack. Detective Miles Collins, the lead investigator on the case. Collins was a man in his 40s, with a tired face and a rumpled suit that suggested long hours and too much coffee. He was a professional, a man who dealt in facts and evidence, and Parker hoped he would be the anchor to stop his sinking case. Parker's direct examination was short and to the point. He needed to land a quick, decisive blow. "Detective Collins," Parker began, "in the course of your investigation, did you obtain any video evidence?" "Yes, we did," Collins replied in a monotone, businesslike voice. "We recovered security footage from a camera mounted on a warehouse across the street from the alley in question." "And have you prepared that footage to be shown to the court today?" "Yes, it is queued up and ready to play. Your Honor, the prosecution would like to play Exhibit C for the jury." Judge Lawson nodded. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly, and a large monitor flickered to life. The footage was grainy, shot in black and white infrared. It showed the dark alley, the back of the blue sedan just visible. The timestamp in the corner read 11:28 p.m. A figure in a dark, hooded sweatshirt walked into the frame. The person's gait was casual. They approached the car, paused at the driver's side door for a moment, and then got in. The interior light flicked on, illuminating the silhouette, but the hood and the poor angle completely obscured the face. A few moments later, the figure, now identifiable as a man, bolted from the passenger door and ran off into the darkness, just as a second, larger figure, Officer Reed, entered the frame. Parker paused the video. "Detective, you reviewed this footage as part of your investigation, correct?" "I did." "And in your professional opinion, is the figure seen entering the vehicle consistent with the defendant, Ethan Carter?" "Yes," Collins said flatly. "Same height, same slender build. He was wearing a similar dark hoodie when he was arrested." "Thank you, Detective." Parker turned to the jury with a look that said, "See, it's him." No further questions. Ethan rose, feeling a surge of confidence. The video was the prosecution's last piece of solid evidence, and he knew it was as weak as all the rest. "Detective Collins," Ethan began, approaching the stand. "Thank you for your testimony. Let's talk about this video. You said the figure is consistent with me. That's not the same as saying it is me, is it?" "It's a positive comparison," Collins hedged. "But you cannot definitively identify the person in that video, can you? You can't see their face." Collins sighed. "The facial features are not visible, no. So it could be anyone of a similar height and build, wearing a common item of clothing like a dark hoodie?" "It's possible," Collins conceded reluctantly. "Is it possible," Ethan pressed, "that the person in that video is Ryan Harris?" Parker shot up. "Objection! The witness can't possibly answer that." "The witness is the lead detective, Your Honor," Ethan countered. "I'm asking about the course of his investigation. I believe he can answer." "Overruled," Judge Lawson said. "The detective will answer if he can." Collins shifted uncomfortably. "I have no way of knowing who that is. We identified the suspect at the scene. It was the defendant." "Exactly," Ethan pounced. "Your investigation stopped the second you had me, didn't it? Did you ever once consider another suspect?" "There was no reason to. All the evidence pointed to the defendant." "What evidence, Detective? The evidence of a forced entry that didn't happen? The evidence of hot-wiring a car that wasn't tampered with? The testimony of an officer who couldn't possibly have seen what he claimed to have seen?" "Objection! Counsel is badgering the witness!" Parker shouted. "Sustained. Mr. Carter, watch your tone," the judge warned, but there was no real heat in her voice. "My apologies, Your Honor," Ethan said, then turned back to Collins. "Detective, after you learned that the car had been loaned to Ryan Harris earlier that day, did you go back and question him?" "No," Collins admitted. "The DA's office felt we had a strong enough case against the defendant." "So you had information that another person had access to the car, had the key, was in the area on the day of the incident, and you didn't follow up on that lead?" "Our investigation was complete." "Detective," Ethan said, his voice ringing with indignation, "would you call an investigation that ignores critical leads and focuses on the first person you find complete? Or would you call it tunnel vision?" Collins' face flushed with anger. "I resent that implication, son. We followed the evidence. It seems to me you only followed the evidence that led in one direction," Ethan shot back. He turned to the jury, his arms spread wide in a gesture of appeal. They had their story from the moment Officer Reed made the arrest. A young kid, a stolen car, case closed. They didn't want to look for the truth. They just wanted a conviction. The jurors' faces were a study in deep, profound doubt. They looked from the grainy, anonymous figure on the frozen screen to Ethan, and then to the flustered detective on the stand. They had been told a simple story of a car thief caught in the act, but the story was unraveling at every seam. The prosecution's case, once a mighty fortress, now looked like a house of cards in a hurricane. "No further questions for this witness, Your Honor." As Detective Collins stepped down from the stand, a heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Mr. Parker looked utterly defeated, his papers scattered before him in disarray. He had failed to repair the damage. Judge Lawson surveyed the scene from her elevated perch, her expression unreadable. She cleared her throat, and the sound made everyone jump. "Mr. Carter," she said, her sharp gaze pinning him to his chair. While you have certainly raised significant questions regarding the charge of grand theft, Otto, let us not forget the second charge you are facing, resisting arrest. Officer Reed testified that you fled from him after he identified himself as a police officer. That is a serious offense in its own right. Do you have a defense for that charge? Her intervention was a lifeline to the prosecution. Even if the theft charge was doomed, she was reminding the jury that running from the police was still a crime. Ethan felt a fresh wave of anxiety. He had dismantled the first charge, but this one was trickier. It was his word against a police officer's. A police. He stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. I do have a defense. The defense calls Ryan Harris to the stand. If the courtroom had been shocked before, it was electrified now. Parker's head snapped up. Ryan, who had been sitting hunched in the back of the gallery, looking pale and sick, appeared to shrink even further into his seat. Your Honor, I must object again, Parker pleaded. This is an ambush. Mr. Carter, the judge said, her voice stern. Explain yourself. Now. Detective Collins just testified that he never questioned Ryan Harris, Ethan explained, his voice urgent. No one has heard his side of the story. We know he had the car. We need to know what he did with it. His testimony is directly relevant to my state of mind in that alley, which is the key to understanding the resisting arrest charge. Judge Lawson considered it, her gavel tapping lightly against her desk. She looked at the jury, who were all leaning forward, their eyes wide with anticipation. She was a judge, but she was also, in her own way, a director of this drama, and she clearly recognized a pivotal scene when she saw one. Objection overruled. The court is interested in hearing what Mr. Harris has to say. Bailiff, please escort him to the stand. Ryan Harris moved like a man walking to his own execution. He was a young man, probably the same age as Ethan, but he lacked any of Ethan's composure. His hands trembled as he took the oath, and he refused to make eye contact with anyone, especially his aunt and uncle in the gallery. Ethan approached him, keeping his voice calm and non-threatening. Ryan, thank you for speaking to us. Can you please tell the court what you did with your uncle's car on the evening of April 17th? Ryan swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. I drove around for a while. I was upset. I ended up parking in that alley downtown to clear my head. And what time was this? I don't know. Maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock? What happened when you parked the car? I got a text from my girlfriend. We had a big fight over the phone. I was angry, and I wasn't thinking straight. I got out of the car and started walking. I just wanted to walk it off. And when you got out of the car, Ryan, Ethan asked, his voice dropping slightly, what did you do with the keys? Ryan's eyes flickered nervously. I think I left them, in the ignition, or maybe on the seat. I don't remember. I was just so mad. I slammed the door and walked away. So there it was, the final piece of the puzzle. The car was unlocked, with the keys inside. There was no break-in because none was needed. One last question, Ryan, Ethan said. While you were in that alley before you left, did you see anyone else around? Anyone at all? Ryan's gaze darted around the room before landing on the floor again. Yeah, he mumbled. When I first pulled in, I saw some guy. He was just hanging out at the other end of the alley, near the dumpsters. He looked kind of sketchy. He was watching me. A sketchy man watching you from the shadows, Ethan repeated, letting the jury absorb the image. Thank you, Ryan. That's all. As a shell-shocked Ryan Harris stumbled away from the witness stand, Ethan turned to address the judge and jury. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, his voice filled with a newfound power. The prosecution wants you to believe I ran from a police officer. But what really happened in that alley? Let's look at the facts we've just learned. He began to pace in front of the jury box, just as Parker had done, but his energy was different. It wasn't smug. It was impassioned. A car is left abandoned in a dark alley. It's unlocked. The keys are inside. A young man, me, stumbles upon it. It looks abandoned, maybe stolen and dumped. I get inside, maybe to see if there's a registration, maybe just out of foolish curiosity. Suddenly, a man, a large man in a dark jacket, not a uniform, appears from the shadows 50 feet away and starts shouting and running at me. His badge is covered. There is nothing to identify him as a police officer. He stopped and made eye contact with the jury foreman, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. Now, add one more fact. The fact that Ryan Harris just gave us. There was a sketchy man lurking in that same alley just moments before. What would you do? What would any reasonable person do in that situation? Would you assume this man running at you from the dark was a police officer? Or would you assume he was the sketchy character you were warned about, a criminal, a threat? You would run. I ran. I didn't run because I was guilty of a crime. I ran because I was scared for my life. He turned to look at Judge Lawson. Her face, for the first time since the trial began, had softened. The hard lines of judicial authority had been replaced by something that looked like understanding. She wasn't looking at a defendant anymore. She was looking at a terrified kid who had been in the wrong place at the very worst time. I was not resisting arrest, Ethan concluded, his voice resonating through the silent courtroom. I was fleeing from what I believed to be a dangerous stranger in a dark alley. The prosecution's second charge is as baseless as the first. The momentum had shifted so completely that the air in the room felt different. The weight of presumed guilt had lifted, replaced by a palpable sense of empathy. But Ethan knew it wasn't enough. The jury had heard from police officers and witnesses. Now, they needed to hear from him. They needed to see the story through his eyes. "Your Honor," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "the defense calls its final witness, Ethan Carter." A hush fell over the gallery. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. He walked from the defense table to the witness stand, his own footsteps echoing in the vast space. He felt strangely calm. After questioning everyone else, it was a relief to finally just tell his own story. He was sworn in and sat down, facing the 12 men and women who held his future in their hands. Since he was representing himself, there would be no question and answer. Judge Lawson gave him a slight nod. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice unexpectedly gentle, "you may give your testimony in a narrative form. Please, just tell the jury what happened." Ethan took a deep breath. "My name is Ethan Carter," he began. "On the night of April 17th, I was walking home. I'd just finished a late shift at the diner where I work as a dishwasher. It's a 3-mile walk, and my usual route was blocked due to construction, so I cut through the warehouse district. It's a shortcut I've taken before." He spoke simply, without flourish or drama. He wanted them to feel the reality of his situation. As I was walking down a service lane, I saw a car parked in an alley. A door was slightly ajar, and the interior light was on. It just looked wrong, out of place. I thought maybe it had been stolen and dumped, or maybe someone was in trouble. I hesitated, but my curiosity got the better of me. I walked up to it. The driver's side door was unlocked. I opened it and looked inside, and I saw the keys, just sitting there on the passenger seat. My first thought was that it was a bait car, but then I just felt confused. Who leaves a nice car like that unlocked with the keys inside? I thought maybe I could find the registration in the glove box, see the address, and maybe walk over and tell the owner they'd left their car open. He paused, a look of self-reproach on his face. It was a stupid idea. I know that now. I shouldn't have touched it. I shouldn't have gotten in. But I was 18, and I was trying to do the right thing in a clumsy, naive way. So I sat down in the driver's seat. I picked up the keys. And that's when I saw him. His eyes drifted to the back of the courtroom, as if reliving the moment. A shadow detached itself from the other shadows at the end of the alley. A man. I couldn't see his face, just a silhouette. And then he started yelling. Not words I could understand at first, just an angry sound. And he was running, right at me. I panicked, Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly with the remembered fear. My mind went to every horror story you can imagine. Carjacking, robbery, kidnapping. I didn't think police. Why would I? There were no sirens, no flashing lights, just a dark shape and a loud voice. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I jumped out the other side and I ran. I ran as fast as I could. I didn't know the area well. I got turned around in the maze of alleys and ended up right back where I started. The man was there, waiting for me by the car. He grabbed me, and it was only then, when he was pinning me against the hood of the car and the light from the street hit him just right, that I saw the badge on his belt. It was the first time I knew he was a cop. He finished his narrative and looked at the jury. Their faces were open, attentive. They were with him. He felt a surge of emotion, frustration, anger, and a desperate need to make them understand more than just the facts of his case. When I was arrested, he continued, his voice taking on a new intensity. No one listened to me. No one asked me what I was doing there. They didn't care. They saw a kid from the poor side of town, in a nice car that wasn't his, and they had their whole story written. The detective, he asked me 2 questions. Why did you steal the car? And why did you run? He didn't ask, did you steal the car? The guilt was already assumed. I sat in a cell for 2 days before I could even make a phone call. I was assigned a public defender who I met for 5 minutes, who looked at the police report and told me my best bet was to plead guilty and hope for a lenient sentence. He told me it was my word against a cop's, and that's a fight you never win. He told me the system is a machine, and it was easier to just let it run you over than to try and fight it. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, but he didn't let them fall. He wouldn't give them tears. He would give them his truth. But I couldn't do it, he said, his voice shaking with passion. I couldn't plead guilty to something I didn't do. This whole system, it's supposed to be about innocent until proven guilty. But that's not true for everyone. If you don't have money for a fancy lawyer, if you don't look a certain way or come from a certain place, you are guilty until you can somehow prove you're innocent. And how are you supposed to do that? The police investigate themselves. The prosecutors only present the evidence that helps their story. It's not a search for truth. It's a battle, and it's a battle that's rigged from the start. He took a shaky breath and looked from face to face in the jury box. I'm not a car thief. I'm not a criminal. I'm a kid who works at a diner, who made a foolish mistake by getting into a car that wasn't his. That's all. For that mistake, the state has tried to ruin my life. All I'm asking you to do is to look past the uniform, to look past the prosecutor's simple story, and to see what really happened in that alley. To see the truth. He fell silent. The courtroom was utterly still. There was no sound, but the quiet hum of the overhead lights. The jury foreman discreetly wiped a tear from her eye. The prosecuting attorney, Mr. Parker, stared down at his table, refusing to look up. Even Judge Lawson seemed affected, her usual stern demeanor replaced by a look of profound contemplation. Ethan had done all he could. He had told his story. He had exposed the flaws in the prosecution's case. Now his fate was no longer in his hands. The closing arguments were a mere formality. Mr. Parker's was brief and lackluster, a tired rehashing of his initial points that now sounded hollow and unconvincing even to his own ears. He knew he had lost, and the lack of conviction in his voice made it plain to everyone. Ethan's closing was simple and direct. He didn't relitigate the evidence. He just asked the jury to remember the reasonable doubt that had been raised at every single turn and to honor their oath. Judge Lawson gave her final instructions to the jury, her voice a neutral drone, reciting the legal standards for guilt and reasonable doubt. Then, at 4:15 p.m., a bailiff led the 12 men and women out of the jury box to begin their deliberations. The waiting was a unique form of torture. Ethan sat alone at the defense table, the cavernous courtroom feeling emptier than ever. The hours crawled by. 5 p.m. came and went, then 6 p.m. At 7 p.m., Judge Lawson announced that the jury had been sequestered for the night and would resume deliberations in the morning. Ethan spent a sleepless night in a holding cell, the events of the trial replaying in his mind in an endless loop. Had he done enough? Had he been clear? Did they believe him? Every flicker of doubt on a juror's face, every stern glance from the judge came back to haunt him in the darkness. The next morning, the tension in the courtroom was thick enough to taste. The gallery was packed. At 10:30 a.m., the bailiff entered. "All rise," he boomed. Judge Lawson took her seat, followed by the jury, who filed in with solemn, unreadable expressions. They avoided looking at Ethan. His heart sank. He had read that was a bad sign. "Mr. Foreman," Judge Lawson said, addressing the middle-aged woman with the kind eyes. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and steady. She handed a slip of paper to the bailiff, who carried it to the judge. Judge Lawson unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned the contents, her face betraying no emotion. The silence stretched for an eternity. Ethan held his breath until his lungs burned. "On the charge of grand theft auto," the judge read, her voice ringing out in the stillness. "How do you find the defendant, Ethan Carter?" The foreman stood and took a deep breath. She looked directly at Ethan, and for the first time, a small, reassuring smile touched her lips. "We find the defendant not guilty." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Ethan felt his entire body go limp, and he collapsed back into his chair, the breath rushing out of him in a ragged sob of relief. But it wasn't over. "And on the charge of resisting arrest," Judge Lawson continued, "how do you find the defendant?" "On the charge of resisting arrest," the foreman declared, her voice now ringing with conviction, "we find the defendant not guilty." The courtroom erupted. Cheers and applause broke out from the gallery. Reporters scrambled for the doors. Mr. Parker slumped in his seat, staring blankly at his empty legal pad. Ethan just sat there, head in his hands, tears of overwhelming relief streaming down his face. He had done it. Against all odds, he had won. Judge Lawson banged her gavel, restoring a semblance of order. "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. You are dismissed." As the jurors filed out, several of them gave Ethan encouraging nods and smiles. When the room had cleared, Judge Lawson looked down at him. The stern, mocking judge from the first day was gone completely. In her place was a woman who looked genuinely impressed. "Mr. Carter," she said, and her voice was filled with a respect he had not expected. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have never seen a defendant represent themselves with such diligence, intelligence, and grace. You conducted yourself with more professionalism than many of the lawyers who appear in this courtroom." She paused, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You have a keen mind for logic and a passion for justice. Have you ever considered a career in law?" Ethan looked up at her, wiping the tears from his eyes. The thought had crossed his mind in the library, a fleeting fantasy. But hearing it from her, it suddenly felt real. Possible. "I'm starting to, Your Honor," he said, a real smile breaking through his exhaustion. "I'm starting to." The courthouse doors felt impossibly heavy, but as Ethan pushed them open, he was met not with the quiet anonymity he craved, but with a blinding barrage of flashing cameras and shouted questions. A crowd of reporters had formed on the steps, a media scrum hungry for a soundbite from the boy who had beaten the system. He blinked in the sudden sunlight, feeling overwhelmed. He had fought his battle in the quiet, structured world of the courtroom. This was a different kind of chaos. He tried to push his way through, offering a series of no comments, when a figure broke through the line of reporters. It was Ryan Harris. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked at Ethan, his expression a miserable cocktail of guilt and shame. "Ethan," he said, his voice cracking. "Man, I am so sorry, for everything. I was a coward. I saw the news about your arrest, and I was too scared to come forward. I almost let you go to prison for something that was my fault. I don't know how you can forgive me." Ethan looked at him. He saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. He could have been angry. He had every right to be. He could have yelled, cursed him for the hell he had been put through. But looking at the sea of cameras, at the grand, imposing courthouse behind him, He felt a sudden, profound sense of clarity. The fight wasn't with Ryan. The fight was with the assumptions, the prejudices, the very machinery of a system that was so quick to condemn. Ryan was just another kid who had made a mistake. "I forgive you," Ethan said, and he was surprised by how easily the words came. "Just learn from this. We all have to." He clapped a hand on Ryan's shoulder and moved past him, leaving the reporters and their frantic questions behind. He walked down the steps and onto the street, breathing in the free air. He looked back one last time at the great stone building, at its pillars and its cold, impartial facade. He didn't feel bitterness or anger. He felt a sense of purpose, forged in the fire of the last 2 months. Judge Lawson's question echoed in his mind. "Have you ever considered a career in law?" It was no longer a fantasy. It was a plan. He would go to college. He would go to law school. He would learn the rules of the system not just to defend himself, but to defend others. He would become the person he had so desperately needed. A voice for those the system tried to silence. A determined smile touched his lips. His trial was over, but his fight for justice was just beginning. He turned away from the courthouse and started walking, not as a defendant, but as a man who had found his calling in the very place that had tried to break him. He walked towards a future he would build for himself. One case, one argument, one undeniable truth at a time,